UK manufacturing results for July climbed to 3.2% from minus 2.9% in the preceding month. Today I'm joined on the line by Andrew Johnson, Senior Economist at EEF, the manufacturers organisation. So Andrew, what were you expecting and what do you think about today's findings?
Well, we don't really look at output on a monthly basis because things seem to be very volatile, and there's some particular reasons this time around why the monthly figures jump around because of the Jubilee holiday. But on a quarterly basis, we survey our members regularly, and our expectation was second and third quarters have been a bit tougher for manufacturers. We probably would expect output to slowly pick up in the second half of the year, but at least in the June-July patch, I think we would have a view that output was fairly flat, if anything. So looking through those two quite volatile results for June and July.
The UK Statistics Office also revealed in a separate report that factory output prices increased 0.5% in August from July and were up 2.2% from a year earlier. The monthly increase was led by petroleum products. What do you think about this?
We have seen prices move around a little bit. I think on the input side, we have seen prices ease quite a lot for manufacturers. So in 2011, we had quite strong pressure on the commodity price side, which was raising costs for manufacturers, and to a certain degree that spilled over into output prices, so what manufacturers were charging their customers. Input price side has fallen away somewhat, but it is true, particularly in terms of the latest Purchasing Managers Index survey, that the output price rises have continued to some degree. I think perhaps that's about recovering margins for manufacturers. We have seen a period where margins have been quite squeezed, and that's particularly the case, I think, with some European markets where the appreciation of sterling has meant there has been a squeeze on margins for UK manufacturers.
And how has the Jubilee holiday affected these results?
So the Jubilee holiday has taken out some working time in June and basically meant that some factories may have even shut down for as long as a week because we had 2 bank holidays in 1 week. So what that means is some of the output that would have happened in June is spilled over into July. So the figures that we have for output for June artificially weakened, and the figures we have for July are artificially strengthened. So that's why it's probably important to look through that impact and try to get a feeling for what's happening in the sector, probably more on a quarterly basis. And as I said, I think we're probably seeing a fairly weak picture at the moment, and that's supported by our own survey and also the Purchasing Managers Index survey, which is probably less susceptible to those one-off impacts that you have from the Jubilee holiday.
The Bank of England has said its outlook remains unusually uncertain and has maintained its bond purchase target. What is your personal opinion on this?
I think it's entirely appropriate that the monetary authorities are maintaining a loose policy at this point, particularly given the relative tightness on the fiscal side. So the government's not prepared to spend at this point in time as it tries to rebalance the public sector accounts. And so necessarily with demand quite weak and a significant degree of spare capacity in the economy, it's totally appropriate that the monetary authority would be looking to maintain loose monetary policy settings, which is obviously primarily through the bank rate being kept at a very low level, but also in the last few years we've also had quantitative easing, and the banks announced extensions to that this year already, which we've seen trying to support the economy that way. I think as the year wears on, we would expect some strength to turn to the economy. We are expecting overall for 2012 to see a contraction. Our own forecast is for minus 0.3% for the year overall, but it's very much a story of two halves of the year. So we've seen some considerable weakness in the first half of the year, some of that impacted by one-off factors, but also reflecting some underlying weakness in terms of domestic demand and weakness in external demand from some of our key markets. As the year progresses, though, we would expect some domestic demand to come back as inflation continues to fall, squeeze on real income starts to ease a little bit, people start to spend a little bit more, and hopefully also on the export side, some of the recent weaknesses we've seen in, for example, emerging markets starts to unwind a little bit and continues to help offset subdued demand that we're seeing from markets close to home, such as those in Europe.
And finally, the OECD believes GDP will fall 0.7% this year instead of its previous prediction of a 0.5% rise. However, the World Economic Forum has placed the UK in its top 10 in its annual Global Competitive Index report. So what do you think?
Well, I guess that downgrade just reflects the weakness that probably you could argue we're seeing globally, with some downturn in terms of demand from markets right across the world really, which are impacting on the UK as much as anywhere else, and combined with our own domestic weaknesses mean that we've gone from a position where a number of forecasters were expecting growth to where we're now expecting a modest contraction. I mean, in terms of the relevance of the World Economic Forum, clearly the UK has to do everything it can, with demand as weak as it is, to make the UK an attractive place for businesses to come and invest and grow. And we might be doing okay on this particular survey, although there's plenty of people who would have questions regarding that, but we're still not seeing growth, and we're still clearly not seeing enough on the supply side, on the business environment, to encourage investment, with demand being as weak as it is. So I think the government needs to press ahead with reform to make the UK a more attractive place to invest and grow a business.
Thank you, Andrew. That is all for right now. The Dúchascopy TV team will be keeping you updated with the latest forex and economic news. Have a great weekend and tune back in on Monday. Goodbye.